Everyone. My name is Alex Babae, and I'm head of research at the Courtauld Institute of Art at the University of London. Although we're not at the Courtauld Institute of Art at the University of London, or rather we're at a very dispersed one, which is all of our own houses, bringing you the first episode in the second series of Open Courtauld Hour, which is our response to the global pandemic and our incarceration in our own homes. And me and my team were kind of hell-bent really on bringing art history forward and sharing it with people. And we're delighted that so many of you are joining us tonight for an episode that is all about the art of feasting, which is something that some of us have been doing maybe more of than we should have, to the extent that some of us, I mean me, have had to start doing squats during meetings with the camera off. So I'm going to introduce my co-host tonight, my colleague Bambra, who, like me, is incarcerated somewhere in South London. Hi, Layla.
Hi, Alex. It's lovely to be back for series 2. So just in case anyone's wondering what the background noise is, it turns out everyone around me is having a party tonight. So sorry if that disrupts anyone. So I'm just going to give a little bit of context to why we felt like this theme was particularly important in 2020. Firstly, eating and food preparation have taken on a new significance during this global pandemic. In the UK particularly, we've seen an overwhelming and actually renewed appreciation for our key workers, for those that work in food production and supermarkets. Food trends such as banana bread have really taken over my social media feed, and spaces of feasting, communal eating, and experiencing food and art together have been closed, banned, and completely altered during lockdown. So in this session, we wanted people to join, cook and eat with us. But more seriously, we wanted to think about the complex and uncomfortable histories that both the food industry and the art world have. Food can often be mistaken as something that is neutral because it's seen as positive, nourishing and a human right. But I think when we are facing the blatant inequalities that have been brought to the surface during this pandemic, especially this week, when access to food for school children has been one of the major headlines, we have a duty, I think, to think about how this works and how art can play a role in this. I'm a big believer in the fact that nothing is produced out of nothing, and everything we're interacting with is affected by the language of representations. So I think it's important to mention that we've used a still life by Cézanne from our collection for the marketing material for tonight. But this artwork is probably traditionally what art history thinks of when it thinks of food and art. But this hour is essentially about reworking that idea and reminding people that the topic of food should never be part of the footnotes of art history, but central to the focus of study. So that's where we're coming from today. So I'll hand back to Alex.
Layla, thanks so much. I'm glad you mentioned banana bread. I have been baking almost daily sourdough cliche. So jumping on, we've also got some backyard astronomy going on here. So I think there's it's interesting how even though apart, we've kind of aggregated around some of these activities. So I just want to explain how this is a kind of magazine format. We've got a number of really wonderful speakers and a performance and an interview or two lined up for this evening. We hope that you'll share questions that you have with us or comments for the speakers on Twitter at CourtauldRes, which is our handle. It's also our handle on Instagram, and please use the hashtag Open Courtauld Hour, and we'll questions with you. If you don't want to use Twitter, and I mean, God knows, I understand why you might not, you can email us researchforum@courtauld.ac.uk. And so now it is my very great pleasure to introduce the first of our speakers tonight, who is Tasha, and she is going to talk to us about a project that is related to another one that she shared with us in the past at one of our research festivals. So it's great to see her again here. Tasha champions food and fragrance as artistic media, and she has been involved in projects that range from museum exhibitions and fragrant installations to interactive lectures, limited edition confectionery, and other kind of amazing amazing, delicious, and interesting things. She's a food artist, a confectioner, and a lecturer at the Art Society. So Tasha, hi, I see you've popped up on my screen.
Hey
I'm
there.
gonna minimize myself and hand over to you.
Hello, hi everyone. So I thought I would do my little mini lecture on something that's closer to my heart, and that is sugar. So this is loosely titled Food and Art Through the Ages, a Sculptural and Sugary History. So my specialism is sugar in the senses. I actually wrote my dissertation about jelly, if anyone has any specific questions about that later. But it's not just because I have a sweet tooth. I think that sugar is this fantastical storyteller, and it has such a tumultuous, uncomfortable, artistic, and varied history, or histories, I should say, that I really think that we all need to engage with more. And the first thing that drew me into the relationship between sugar and art were scenes like this. So this is a Renaissance banquet. This one is actually a wedding banquet from 1587, and everything from on the table there is made from sugar. The castle is made from sugar. It actually fires real sugar artillery, and the ladies and the gentlemen who were visiting would be given little eggs filled with rose water to throw around to cover up the smell of the gunpowder. So in this way, I like to think of dessert banquets like this as one of the early forms of installation art, because it was an all-encompassing experience. It was about the visual, it was about the taste, it was about the smell, it was about the sounds, and that's something that I really resonates with me today. And on top of that, I mean, sugar was this hugely expensive commodity. I mean, one of those sculptures would be an average person's year's salary. So it was such an important symbol of a status symbol. You could show your political allegiances, your religious views, your worldliness, your wealth, and your identity through what you served on the table. And sugar wasn't just a food, it was an artistic medium, and one that had tremendous ability to tell stories. But sugar's power is not just in its materiality, it's in its influence as a commodity. So this here is a artwork made from sugar cubes by an artist called Brendan Jameson, and this is Sir Henry Tate's Mausoleum, because the Tate Galleries, founded by Henry Tate of Tate and Lyle Sugar, sugar is a huge powerhouse when it comes to foodstuffs, and the uncomfortable history of sugar and art is really in its influence as a commodity. And both Henry Tate and Abraham Lyle were operating their 19th century business after the abolition of the slave trade, but it was built on the foundations of the transatlantic slave trade throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. And the extent to which Britain profited from the work of enslaved people can be seen in almost every cultural institution today. And there's actually a project which I want to sort of send people to, which is UCL's Legacies of British slave ownership. And it is a database that chronicles some of that history and what its legacies are today. And on its database, even at the moment, at last count, it was 61,000 slave owners and associates. So this is in the fabric of British society, and something that really needs to be addressed in further ways. But there's an artist's work who I think comments on this better than I ever could, and that is the work of Cara Walker. And her piece here, which is called A Subtlety, or the full title is A Subtlety or the Marvelous Sugar Baby, a homage to the unpaid and overworked artisans of the who have refined our sweet taste from the cane fields to the kitchens of the New World on occasion of the demolition of the Domino sugar refining plant. And this was shown at the Domino Sugar Factory in New York. It's a vast cathedral-like space, which is dominated by the Sphinx figure, which is in the center. And the Sphinx is an icon of civilization, but it's also one of ruin. And I think that Cara Walker here has really employed the dualities of sugar, because sugar is alluring and it is sweet and it draws us in, but it also repels us and is uncomfortable. And I think you really get that with this piece there. You've got the dualities employed on every level. The walls of this space are literally dripping in molasses. So what first draws you in is a sort of sweet, appealing aroma, When the gravitas and the story of the situation begins to set in, it begins to turn your stomach, and that sweetness turns to sickliness. And I think that that is one of the powers of sugar, to have those layered histories, those layered stories. And it's really important for us as historians and as artists to acknowledge those and be aware of them and not sweep them away, to really embrace the bittersweet truth of this stuff, both historically and today. And I think the best artworks that work with sugar really embrace the materiality, but also the history as part of their story. And there's another artist who I wanted to talk about in the same vein, called Shelly Miller. She is a Canadian artist, and this is her work called The Wealth of Some, the Ruin of Others. And this is a sugar tile piece that was put up in public in a port in Brazil. And it's in that iconography of sort of Welsh tiles, this idea of architecture and sugar being very much linked together. And this is another piece that confronts the history of sugar, because it is one that was allowed to slowly rot and disappear off the wall. So if I show you the next image, it's like a sort of crumbling old master, but also this idea of histories that have been faded with time, but not fully erased, because they are part of the fabric of our cities. And lastly, I'm aware this has been a whistle-stop tour, and I wish I could go into more depth on every one of these works. But I wanted to talk about a piece of work that I made as well, because as well as being a historian, I am also an artist. And this is a studio shot from a piece that I created for the V&A in 2017. And it was made using 3D print technology, but mixed with a 17th century recipe. Because for me, mixing the old and new is one of those things that is really special. Where the stories are at is learning from the past to create a new future. So I was commissioned by the V&A to respond to, for an exhibition called Collecting Europe, and myself and 12 other artists were asked to respond to what is Europe going to be 2,000 years from now. And this was around the same time, 2017, same time as sort of Brexit vote was going on. And I was thinking about fragments and ruins, and this idea of how we worship the fragments of things that are left behind, of ancient Greece, of ancient Rome. So I thought, what are the fragments of Europe? So I went around the V&A and I scanned different objects from all different European countries, from France, from Italy, from Spain, and so on. And I then created them, recreated them, cast them in sugar. And this was the piece that I made. It is called Alabaster Ruins. And for me, it brings together some of the influences that I've talked about so far, this idea of sugar as a storyteller, but also the materiality of it, because sugar is a preservative and it can last, but unless you look after it, it will rot and disappear. And I think that's quite symbolic for culture, really. And my joy was getting to show this in the V&A and to use this medium alongside other much more permanent art forms, because the ephemerality of sugar and art is one of the things that makes it so special. But ultimately, I think sugar has so many more stories to tell and so many paths to open and things to explore, and we are only just beginning to do it now, because I don't think that it's technology or tradition that encourage change, but ultimately I think it will always be creativity that will inspire us to new sugar highs.
Oh, thank you so much, Tasha. That's such a great introduction in such a very short time frame.
Yes.
I know it's really hard to give justice to such a complex subject, even with a lot of time, so thank you. I think what really struck me is that it kind of magnifies like social movement at the moment to try and be really transparent about our histories, specifically in the UK curriculum. Personally, I think it would be absolutely amazing if we learned this kind of things, even in food tech classes. Not that I actually ever did one, but you know, it's so pervasive and interesting, and we just don't think about it. And it's really important that we do. So thank you again for taking the time today to share your wealth of knowledge on the subject. And we have one question for you from Linda, who emailed this in. She's asking what you've been doing in lockdown as you're a food historian, and how you think coronavirus will impact your work in the long run, as you might not be able to do tastings and things like that.
Yeah, well, at first, I think when lockdown first happened, like a lot of creatives, there was that blind panic of, because my work is all about the senses. It is about taste and touch and smell, and it was a really bit of a shock to the system when it first happened. But then I think exploring new avenues has been really interesting, and people want content, people need artists. I think it's interesting that through this time, even though artists have been sort of seen as non-essential workers, which might be argued, I think we've all been consuming art, and like we need artists, we need content, we need creative people. So I've been very lucky, and as time has gone on, I found new ways to do this thing. And for instance, tomorrow I'm doing a digital dinner party for the British Academy, so I'll be doing 3 courses live on camera, so people can cook along at home. I've been writing a lot more articles, doing a lot more videos, so there's hopefully lots of things that can be done. And I'm hoping one of the first things to go back will hopefully be working with scent, because it is a very safe medium. It's alcohol based if you think about hand sanitizer, so I'm hoping that perfume might be quite quick off the mark as something we can use to tell sensory stories again.
Oh, that's great. No, you're definitely right. I think people, as the more and more lockdown goes on, people definitely are valuing artists and the creative arts more. And if people are not valuing it, you just think about, you're consuming it all the time. You're basically spending most of your time watching Netflix, listening to music. So it's been a really interesting few months, and hopefully, yeah, everything will go back to a new normal that actually gives people, the platform that they deserve. So
and I was just going to say, take the opportunity to read and really open your mind to other things. And I should say, for anyone who wants to explore the legacy of sugar in the UK, there's a book called Sweetness and Power by Sydney Mintz, which is a really great one to start with.
Oh, fab. Yeah, well, I'll definitely be reading that. And I'll also be looking at sugar differently from now on. So thank you again. And we are now going to move on to our second speaker of the session. I am so thrilled to introduce you all to Fawzia Ismail, someone who I've admired for a long time. Fawzia's Bristol-based Somali supper club, Arawila Eats, explores the tastes of home, identity, and the connection to our roots through food, communal eating, and cooking. So Fawzia has created a platform for exploring East African food in exciting ways, not just what's being served on the plates at our supper club, but what it means for understanding of belonging in a post-Brexit world. This has involved researching and writing about race and British identity for the Oxford Symposium on Food and Cookery, designing workshops with Keep It Complex Feminist Art Collective, Serpentine Gallery, Jerwood Project Space and Museum of London, and Colonial Countryside Project, using food as a method to think through some of these complex issues. So Fawzia, if you wanted to reveal yourself, I'm not sure if I can... are you there?
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. Hi, Layla. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I am going to do a whistle-stop tour as well of my presentation. So I'm just going to share the screen for you. So if you bear with me for a second.
No problem. I'll stay with you while you're doing this.
Yes. Let me just make sure the sharing. Play slide.
Perfect.
Okay.
Right, I'll pass over to you. Thanks.
Okay. Hi. So a solution is found in salt and spice. My name's Fawzia Ismail. I run Arawila Eats Supper Club, and this is a quote from a book by James C. McCann, which was on the history of African cuisine. So I set up the supper club really in response to, quite frankly, Brexit, racism, hostile environment. It feels like we've been in crisis for years. It feels like a lot of white people are just waking up to things that Black people have been saying for years. And so I feel like in 2016 was a crunch point for me, but the hostile environment had been building up for a long time in this country. So my way of dealing with that was to eat Somali food, and lots of it. So I decided to open up my home and learn more about Somali food and cooking techniques. one of the things that came up when I set up the supper club was this issue around the erasure of African cuisine, which I wrote a paper about. And it relates to Tasha's presentation earlier on sugar. The investment of sugar with the creation of enslaved people through the triangular trade really meant that a lot of people invested it heavily in making Black people unhuman to justify this trade. And so a lot of the ignorance that we've seen around Brexit, around British identity, which is completely lacking about how Britain was built, and colonialism, it really can be tied back to our everyday material culture, and particularly food culture, which I'm really interested in. Here there's a poster by Keep It Complex Feminist Art Collective called Potatoes Are Immigrants. I love this poster because it speaks to the fact so many of our foods and plant origins aren't original to the British Isle. So it makes you think, what is native food? A lot of the work that I do with the Supper Club really involves interrogating and using food to kind of think through these complex issues around identity, particularly looking at a politics of care. I set up the Supper Club because I wanted to care for myself, and also food as a space of solace. And I think it speaks to a politics of care that Professor Joan Anam Addo, who's a professor of Caribbean literature and culture at Goldsmiths, talks about when she talks about the concept of counter-writing the academy through Black feminist work and activism. And the kinds of works we do here are interventions really that are trying to care for ourselves and our communities against what are against oppression, everyday oppression. So I want to move on to a project that I did recently at the Arnold Feeney called Camel, Meat and Tapes. This was a wonderful project working with Somali elders in Bristol. I was a city fellow looking at the concept of co-creation, and I wanted to explore how camel meat, when I was a child, we would have camel meat arriving with this dried muqamad, which is really important foodstuff for nomadic Somalis, arriving with cassette tapes. And so you would hear the sound of your relatives on these tapes. And I started doing some of this work with Ayan Elmi, who's an artist based in Bristol, and Asma Jama, two young, beautiful Somali young women who are artists. And we worked with the elderly Somali community to kind of explore the importance of food and sound in Somali culture. And I want to talk to you about Dagan philosophies. These are kind of, one of the women here during the project talked about culture being a companion, culture as companion. And I love this description of culture as companion. And I would say food culture is one of our biggest companions. And it's really important to kind of understand the way in which, you know, there's a quote by a food historian, Felipe Fernandez Amasto, that relates to this. So he talks about culture began when the raw got cooked. And in this, he talks about socializing. Without fire, we would never have developed culture. It's socialized eating by making it an activity in a fixed place at a fixed time by a community of eaters. And a lot of the work that I do, I guess, relates to how does our sense of belonging within this kind of eating context, the communal eating and food, place us as individuals in the context of within borders, within this pandemic, and within protest. And I really feel like food becomes a real, not just a place of solace, but a real site for activism for a lot of communities. And alongside that, I want to talk about this idea that Dr. Ahmed Elmi, a Somali academic, talks about, Somali Dagan cultural philosophies, encapsulate multiple bodies of living comprehensive knowledge. And I really want us to really attend to that. It's living comprehensive knowledge, acts of knowledge production. And I feel this is what we were trying to do with centering Somali food, centering Somali sound within what I would deem institutional art spaces or art centres that actually never attend to our needs or our community's needs. I'm going to move you on to the soundscape, which I hope you'll be able to hear. So this is just a little taster. I love this image. It was the first showing we had of the soundscape, and you can see the concentration and this communal listening. We also had Somali food there at the event, and a lot of our work, Somali food, has featured really deeply in it. And I think it was a wonderful event that really brought people together in communion during what turned out to be a difficult time. From this, we've sort of set up a collective, sort of Somali feminist collective, to explore these ideas further. And you can find us on www.dagan, which is spelled DHAQAN.org. And we'll be launching the soundscape at some point in July. So please do go on that website. I just want to end with a quote here from one of from Asma, who did a poem on the night. For a long time, I've been obsessed with ancestors, and during this project, I had the opportunity to connect with still living ones. Of course, the elders we worked with are human and fallible and have a range of different personalities that we grew to know and love as we worked with them. But they also represented something greater than themselves, an entire living archive of memories and experiences, stories, language, and knowings. And I think I love that quote around knowings. And this is what I really want to take forward with me in the food journeys that I hope to continue with. Thank you.
Fawzia, thank you so much. It's so odd not to be able to clap after someone's given such a wonderful talk. It's kind of strange, kind of talking about things in your living room to who knows who. But I can see on Twitter that people are really loving the ideas that you've shared. And we have one question from this, which is about the kind of pace of change. I mean, you mentioned that at the beginning of your talk, this sensation that we've been embroiled in this horrible crisis where things have surfaced alongside new catastrophes emerging. And this question is really about that. What do you think has changed post-Brexit and during the pandemic? And do you see us as being on a kind of precipice of some kind of positive global change?
I hope so. I mean, I would love to. I think what's changed is we have got tired. I think Black peoples across the world have got tired, and people are exhausted. And a really interesting thing is the social and digital media, which we're now all interacting with because we're forced to kind of exchange in this way, has actually created opportunities for us to realize how much of racism is so abnormal. So amongst us, I'm talking about from talking to Black people in America or here, like the global oppression and anti-Blackness, which it kind of is an accepted thing in so many societies. I think people have really, really been writing about, attending to for years. I would say this has been conversations that have been going on within the Black community. The violence has become too much, and what's really interesting about this pandemic is it's forced a time of reflection for everyone. So everyone is reflecting, on how the crisis is affecting people. And yeah, the Colston statue fell down in Bristol. You know, it was taken down, and I feel like Bristol, you know, that we work here, we attend to all of these issues around colonialism here in the city, but it was a significant moment. It really, I feel it was a significant moment, particularly that statue going down.
And especially given that it had been a focus for so much activism, and I think from what I can have picked up, a sense of kind of growing frustration that the gears of change were grinding too slow. You know?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of things around how institutions engage with Black communities that I think will need reflecting on. And I really hope to share that more widely in terms of working with Arnolfini. There were challenges in terms of how we work with our institutions while maintaining a level of integrity, and also that concept of a politics of care that comes really deep-rooted from not wanting to exploit knowledge production from marginalized communities is something that I'm really interested in.
I mean, you touch on something that has been, you know, a topic of really intense discussion in my own institution as well, as you can probably imagine. I think, you know, that time of reflection, I hope, you know, and like you, I really hope that something good comes of it. And like you, I feel like we could probably eat our way out of it in some way, you know, like the rituals of dining and the exposing what food means to people. So look, thank you so much for sharing your talk with us tonight and for joining us. It's been great to meet you, and I hope we'll see you again when we can actually taste the spice.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, real pleasure. Thank you so much. And so now we're gonna change gear a little bit and welcome my really cherished colleague and friend Suzanne Babae onto the screen. Are you there, Suzanne? Suzanne is, oh, I hear her, but I don't see her. I wonder. Oh, there you are. Hey. So Suzanne is a colleague of mine in the art history department at the Courtauld. You've been at the Courtauld longer than me, but less time than me. If you count my student years, I think I got a few years on you. But you came in 2013.
Correct. Yep.
And you had quite a career journey before joining the Courtauld. Could you tell us a little bit about it before you share your talk?
Hi, everyone. It's really a delight to be here. And I thank you very much, Alex. And thank you, Fauzia and Tasha, for these amazing talks. Mine feels very academic now in comparison to these lively and very much visceral reflections on what's happening around us. So I came to the Courtauld in 2013, having spent a couple of years teaching in Munich, and before that having lived on a research project in Cairo and in Damascus and Aleppo, before all those places became no longer available to us. I studied in America, but I also studied in Iran. And so I come from this very mixed disciplinary backgrounds. I studied as a graphic designer and then became an art historian rather accidentally. I thought that the Renaissance was the pinnacle of art history before I discovered that Islamic art is even better. So here we are. So I teach Islamic arts, and particularly my specialty, which is on the arts of Iran, Greater Iran. So it's the Persianate world, if you will, West Asia, if you will. And I am an art historian through and through, actually, though an accidental one, but I have embraced it and I understand it. If I may carry on, can I carry on, Alex?
I think you should just go. Go. I'm gonna mute myself and turn my face off, and yeah. You're doing a better job of interviewing you than I could. Okay.
No, please. I just wanted to say that one of the great ways for us to understand the past through the work of art, through the spatial arrangements, through architecture, and so forth, for the benefit of our present, is to actually dig deeply into these visual and spatial and obviously written evidence of the experience of life through food, through senses in general. And I'm really interested, just as Tasha was talking and Fawzia was talking about this, the kind of collective sensory record of our pasts, which become venues for creation of a sense of identity. These identities are not specific to an ethnic group or a linguistic group or a racial group, but that they are shared across time, and really are this very mix of things, how they are adapted, adopted, and then put forward. So what I wanted to do was talk about one of the ways art history really allows us to explore areas that relate to, for instance, food and sharing of food and food cultures and the sensory experiences, from gustatory to sense of smell to touch to seeing, of course. So a very important point for me has been to actually foreground how the arts other than European arts, so if we think about European and American arts as being placed at the center of art history as the canonical, to go beyond it and to look at other traditions of the arts and really begin to peel away from what is the layers of an academic thinking about art history, you begin to see all these other really fresh points of view about food, about art, about beauty, concepts of beauty, the way a taste is both gustatory and a visual taste, and so on. So Islamic arts has been my venue for this kind of exploration. And I wanted to share with you a few slides, and especially, if I may, Grace is very gracefully going to help me navigate this whole thing. So we uploaded this recipe, which comes, it's a cuckoo. A cuckoo, everyone says, is like an Italian frittata. I would say no, an Italian frittata is like a cuckoo. And a cuckoo is really one of those amazing dishes. And this recipe, which you can read it on our social media, is so generous. The chef says, if you don't have this, well, add that. If you don't have that, you add this. But what matters in the end is to him that it is, these are mixed properly, and then they are cooked in such a way that it will become long, like 4 fingers in length, that a very capable and masterful person can do this. If I may have the next slide, and that he says that it should be like a beehive inside and 4 fingers long and so forth. So he has a very great sense of the look of this food, and otherwise it might fall apart. And then he tells people to stop asking him for any further. He says, if I go further in describing the varieties of cuckoo, it will become a headache, actually, to the readers and the writers. So I won't continue on that part. But I wanted to say this. First of all, the cuckoo is the one on the right, and this rice dish known as a jewel rice on the left. These are identity markers that come to us from late 16th and 17th centuries through a cookery treatise, a book, which is what it's called On the Science of Cookery, which is to say, it is understood the science, the term in Arabic, fan, is also the term used for the arts, actually. And it was written as a result of a sort of a collection of knowledge about food and recipes of the past, which a court chef actually makes it. If I could have the next one. And he, in fact, presents this together with a large number of new dishes, which are those Persian rice dishes, for which Persian cookery is still famous, about which Iranians, Afghans, and North Indians and Central Asians all take pride in making their own variety in that region. And for these, what we understand, or what I understand, I'm interested actually in I started with the architecture that is the space of feasting, interested in this communal gatherings, the notion of generosity and hospitality. And from there, I have gone down to dishes. And I mean dishes like the ones, plates and dishes in the left-hand top slide, or dishes as in recipes, which are then delivered in certain ways. When the chef says, whoever makes it should also deliver it, because only he knows how this is perfectly put together. In other words, a very clear sense of the way you compose things, and a sense actually for those ingredients, a certain degree of respect that one understands from that period. The fact that in these paintings, what you see on the lower left-hand side, the woman is making noodles, somebody is bringing a bowl, it's a Chinese style porcelain, which is made actually in Iran in this period of clay and glazed into blue and white look. Or on the right-hand side, a grilling on open fire, and a man ready to deliver it to the attendees. And by the way, there are these cones of sugar in the right-hand side slide, which are expressive of that notion of status, of prestige. So food, in a way, becomes a language of communication. If I could have the next slide, I want to just simply show you how in a gathering, the very plenty, the sort of generosity of that shared meal becomes an element of expression, of beliefs, and in fact, a very spiritually minded representation of why the feast matters as a political action, as a cultural action, as a way of actually speaking without speaking in words. So here in this detail from a wall painting, we find a large group of, in conventional terms of painting, reduced to a few, a group of people who are carrying food into the next slide, which shows you where a feast is taking place actually. And that the feast is resided by the Shah, the king, the Safavid ruler, in fact, in a place specially designed for this kind of feasting, communal feasting. I only wanted to also point out that if we look at these other cultural scenes, we may come across, for instance, evidence already recorded by Europeans that in, for instance, Safavid court or in Ottoman court or in the Mughal court, they were delivering food in courses, one after the other, in small dishes, each of which were specially made for that particular food. That there was a very clean, clear sense of a choreography, a sophisticated way of thinking about food in a community. We understand that these meals would last 3-4 hours, and that the very last, the sort of the height of it was the delivery of these big dishes of rice in these huge platters, each person with their own bowls, with their own sort of vessels to eat in them. And this is the kind of notion of, or a statement of political significance that goes back to belief systems. So there is a hadith, these are sayings and deeds attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, in which the Prophet is said to have said, "Eat together and not separately. for the blessings are associated with the company. These are really spectacles of communal generosity for hospitality purposes. Feasting becomes an expression of identity, in fact, and these are hierarchically organized. If I may have the next slide, to take place in the space of a palace like the one you see here in the city of Esfahan, where everyone was seated in a particular manner. These spoke of hierarchies of significance. The food spoke of hierarchies and status of the various people who were there. To actually offer a morsel of food or a cup of drink was a privilege shared between the high rank and the lower rank. And then these kitchens were a site of generosity beyond the place of the elite, in that they were food was getting out of these elite and royal courts as basically for the feeding of the populace at large. The point I'm trying to make is that the outpouring of largesse and hospitality, which we no longer can do in our lockdowns, is one of those cultural expressions that is shared across the globe. And we really must look at these through the lens of the particularities of habits of people, be they in their own habitats, if I may put it that way, in their homes, basically, that is, homes in countries and regions, or in diaspora communities and in places where they become new members of communities. And I think both Tasha and Fawzia spoke about that, spoke about how identities are formed in these new environments and readapted or adopted and adapted as ways of sharing these cultural worlds. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't take too much time.
Suzanne, that was just wonderful. And it took me back, time travel style, to all those conversations that we've had over the years, where basically the conclusion of them always is we need to do a research project with Yotam Ottolenghi. So Yotam, if you are watching this tonight, we want to do a really complicated AHRC project bid with you. Can I mean, a few things that I want to mention, apart from, I mean, obviously the mustaches, the dancing, the exceptional glamour of the feasts that you've showed. Just thinking back to Fawzia's talk about the way that she is using food as a form of activism and also as connection across time and place. Thinking about what you've been saying makes me kind of think about the historical project that is involved in translating these recipes and understanding what's being said, because some historic recipes are mind-bogglingly complicated, and being able to connect with people not just across space but across time in this way.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, you know, as a kind of someone like you who is multiply expatriate as well, how do those connections feel to you as a researcher and diner?
Well, as a diner, I can tell you it's an amazing thing to really think about this. One of the ways one can think about it is the very fact that those pasts are much more complex than we assume them to be. And in fact, the complexity of cultural encounters and cross-fertilizations in places like Iran, which are at the crossroads of Asia, Europe, and Africa, means that you receive a lot that then historical evidence of these cookery books, for instance, will tell you that some of the new food stuff that were being transported arrive. And then you also see how they transfer outwards. So one of the ways I find history of art and food and all these various ways of looking at these to be really important for us now is to recognize how incredibly interconnected the world was in the past. And in fact, so much more cosmopolitan was Isfahan or Istanbul or Delhi than was Paris or Rome or London at that same period. We forget these things, and we think that the beginning and the end is right here in London, where I'm
It's so true.
right?
Well, medieval maps put Jerusalem at the center of the world and Britain right on the edge. So yeah,
go, right?
Yeah, so they're fascinating intersections, and I want to talk to you more, but not right now. Don't worry, everyone, about the ceramics. But thank you so much for joining us, and it's always great to see you. And now it's time to hand back to Layla for the penultimate item tonight.
Great, thank you, Alex, and thank you, Suzanne. That was so interesting. So next up, we have Lizette Otten, who is going to be doing our poetry section of the night. Lizette is a disabled activist, writer, poet, spoken word artist, theatre maker, and creative practitioner based in Darlington, which is actually the northeast of England, for anyone that doesn't know that, who does stuff with words. Hi, Lizette. Have you got your camera on?
I have indeed.
Amazing. I can't actually see you, but I'm sure you're there. We spoke a bit the other day about how transferring to an online world has really made me think about access to events, but actually this is really true in spaces of eating as well, like in the private and public sphere, especially from where I am sitting in London. Actually, financially, accessibility on transportation and the number of people makes places of eating quite exclusive entities. So I'm really grateful to have you and your perspective on pieces from our collection on the subject of food and feasting today. So the two artworks that you've picked are actually two really different pieces in style, palette, and texture. And I was wondering if you wanted to say a little bit about them and why you chose them.
So I'm not an artist. I play with words, and when I'm looking at things, I'm looking for that visceral moment that it's a bodily feeling. It grabs me and it brings up memories and smells and tastes. And I saw the piece of art that we've got there, the dinner table, and it immediately reminded me of Northeast Grand's house, all of us crammed into a room that was brown and had far too much furniture for the space. And it was just that smell and that feeling immediately. And then in the next picture that we have, Still Life with Watermelon, it was that feeling of light and travel and smells and tastes that are new, and just longing to leave this little space and branch out. So it was nothing to do with the artist, it was all to do with feeling and what that made me want to write.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, it definitely suits well to the situation we all find ourselves in when we're in lockdown. So just to say, the first piece that everyone saw was by Duncan Grant, and it's Still Life, a dinner table, and the second one was Paul Signat's Still Life with Watermelon. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to you, Zette. So thank you again for coming tonight, and I will mute and turn my camera off. Thank you.
So this is the art of feasting. Set the table, pet. Butter knives with cream stubby handles. We six squash around foldy flap table by the window to the backyard. No room for elbows or please and thank you as spoons tuck in and gravy is poured. White bread sliced with carving knife kept under lock and key. Hornsey coffee pot, Gran's pride and joy, a beacon of brown amongst brown. Jim wipes his hands on the burnt orange curtains when he thinks no one is looking. I am looking. I am dreaming of space beyond beige, of space with horizons vast, unconstrained, of vocabulary caressed by sunlight, of vowels laden with literature, of evenings stretched, cigarette in hand as wine flows, and sea strokes the cusp of our imagination. Of anywhere other than this. cerulean sea rests in the valley of mountains, kissed gold by fading light. I can breathe here. There is room here. There is colour here, daubed by crackling summer storm. No drizzle. She instructs me to spit out the pips, fire them rat-a-tat-tat, machine gun from pursed ripe lips. Or, she teases, watermelon trees will grow in your stomach. I swallow one seed. She laughs. Sweet red dew taints Cupid's bow. Finger traces weighs heavy on pout. I am startled when I realize the finger is mine. She takes my hand. Colours, electric, exposure exploded to white sparks on eyelid. Heat seeps into skin I can smell when I shower. Rain on hot pavement. A trail of sweat from navel to thigh. It takes root inside me. Petrichor, she tells me. I gather that jewelled morsel from her table, along with the pips in my pocket, to bring home and plant in a world of beige when they call me back and I must not refuse. I swallow one seed and never tell. An orchard grows inside me. When the door closes, when all the doors close, when the borders close, when my family are near and yet behind dull walls far, I stand in dank hallway. Last touch lingers on lips, fingers warm from a soft goodbye, from the hug held long with the words we do not say. No clamouring of northern voices layered in autumn shades, slurping up last of stew and mopping with doorstop crusts. No lullabies of birdsong in tongues not mine, gathering up last fleshy morsels, juice sticky on chin. Alone. Swallowed seed, never told, orchard grows. I plant the pocket pips in old 70s cups from a car boot sale at Catterick, bought when we could gather, when I didn't know what it was to miss. Planted because I need your ramshackle clutter, your unmatched table settings lost against a backdrop of brown. Planted because I miss the taste of you. La pastèque. You laughed at my attempt and you poured more wine. I miss the taste of you. I swallowed one seed and never told. An orchard grew inside me.
Thank you so much, Lisa. What a beautiful piece of work. Thank you so much for sharing it, and really, really brilliantly performed as well. Very touching, and connects to so many of the themes that the other speakers talked about this evening, I think. Although I think you were the first person to bring up watermelon. Is that right? So thank you very much. This brings us nearly to the end of our Open Courtauld Hour. Please sign up for next week's Open Courtauld Hour and let us know what you thought about tonight on @CourtauldRes, hashtag Open Courtauld Hour. We're going to finish. We normally finish with a poem. But tonight we're going to finish in a slightly different way by celebrating the opening tonight of our MA curating students' exhibition, Unquiet Moments Capturing the Everyday, which has been supported by Morgan Stanley. And we've got Annie, I think. Annie, are you here from our MA curating course to talk a little bit about what they've been doing today and about the exhibition? So Annie, are you here?
Hi, Alex. Thank you so much.
Hey. Yeah, thank you. It's nice to see you. So I saw you earlier because you and your amazing classmates launched your show on YouTube, and it was actually my first. I know that there have been online openings before now, but it was my first one, and I celebrated by pouring myself a glass of room temperature, not very good white wine to toast you, which is of course what we do at openings. So can you tell us a little bit about first of all, really about the journey that you've made from the conception of this show to its execution?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so as you said, we've just finally opened our exhibition. It's been a bit of an emotional roller coaster getting it off the ground. And somehow the past 24 hours, we have been working, I feel, maybe to the same level as we would have been if we were in a gallery space, putting the final nails in the wall. But we are a group of 9 young curators who are all enrolled on the Courtauld's 12-month programme, a Masters in Curating the Art Museum. And every year this course culminates in an exhibition organised and opened by the students, and drawing upon loans from both the Courtauld Gallery collection, but also the Arts Council collections. And of course, this year we've had the added challenge of moving online because of the pandemic. And the theme of the exhibition actually grew from Somerset House's summer programme, responding to the building's history as a site of the nation's official registry of births, marriages and deaths. And this was a physical exhibition concept that we began with. And our response from the outset has been to investigate what it is that an official archive or registry actually documents, and try to shed light on all of the moments that might fall outside of that in some way. So Unquiet Moments is an exhibition kind of interrogating what documentations of everyday life might be. And we've been interested in the moments of beauty and joy, as well as disappointments and tragedy that truly make up the diversity of lived experience. And I think we all feel that this theme has only become more poignant in this moment of lockdown, where people's awareness of their everyday has perhaps in some way become intensified.
So tonight we've been talking about food, and the kind of curious way that there's been, well, we're deprived from so many ordinary experiences of eating together, eating in restaurants, readily available ingredients, all that kind of stuff, to the kind of I don't guess re-engagement with cooking our own meals, and those kinds of things that once were very routine and have somehow slipped away from a lot of our everyday practices. And I'm interested in the intersections that you might spot between our theme of food tonight and your Unquiet Moments show. Are there any works that you can think of, or that you've thought about in the show that relate to the theme of food and dining?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think as we've seen from all of the speakers tonight, food and daily ceremonies of eating are perhaps some of the most consistent, in a way, features of everyday life. And of course, how food can also be a really central marker of cultural heritage. And one of the artists specifically included in Unquiet Moments, whose practice engages with these ideas, is Kabir Hussain. And Hussain was born in the Punjab province of Pakistan, but moved to Yorkshire here in the UK at the age of 7. And much of his sculptural practice draws upon his experience of migration and the transition he experienced from one culture to another. And the work that we're showing in the exhibition is a bronze casting of the Middle Eastern landscape as he observed it from the aeroplane window whilst on that defining journey to the UK. But he also talks a lot in his practice about how his cultural identity is primarily defined by Pakistani food and Punjabi cooking, of which he has these incredibly strong visceral memories. And in 2006, he developed this really beautiful series of incredibly realistic bronze cast sculptures of the foods and spices common to his birthplace in Pakistan. And this series, Temporal Moments, positions, for example, garlic cloves and chilies and walnuts onto plates cast from those belonging to his wife's non-Pakistani family. And so he really brings together quite poetically these two cultures within his family through food and ceremonies of eating, and I feel kind of eternalizes that in bronze forever.
Oh, thank you so much. How can people see this work? Where can they see your show?
The exhibition, the online exhibition, you can find at unquietmoments.courtauld.ac.uk, and you can also find a link on all of our social media platforms with the handle @MACurating, all one word. But do also take a look at our events program, because we've got lots of really interesting artist conversations coming up over the coming weeks.
Thank you so much, Annie, and congratulations. And please pass them on to everyone involved, because we're just so impressed by the way that you and your peers translated your real life exhibition into a digital exhibition and have made such a success of it. So thanks very much indeed. And we'll also make sure that you can find this exhibition on @CourtauldRes. We'll tweet the link as well. So thank you very much. And that's it from us for this evening. I just want to thank everybody, Annie, Lisette, Suzanne, Fozia, and Tasha for their really inspiring talks, and also my co-host Layla for curating such a wonderful evening. And I hope we'll see you next week. So good night.